Imagine being trapped in a tower, miles from civilization, with nothing but the howling wind and your own paranoia for company. Now add inexplicable noises, ghostly apparitions, and a history of tragedy. Welcome to the world of Lighthouse horror stories, where isolation meets the supernatural and reality blurs with your darkest nightmares. Let's begin. 347 people have vanished at Sul Chuai Point Lighthouse since 1895. Tonight, as blood drips from the tower walls and ghostly whispers echo through empty corridors, I fear I will become number 348. The sounds coming from above are not human. They are the twisted echoes of souls trapped between worlds, their tormented screams cutting through the darkness like shards of broken glass. My investigation team had abandoned me hours ago, leaving me alone in this towering beacon on the Michigan coast. The historical records never mentioned the screams. They never warned about the heavy footsteps that echo through empty corridors, or the shadow that stands watching from the top of the tower every night at exactly 3 a.m. The investigation equipment lies scattered across the floor now, smashed beyond repair. The cameras, the EMF meters, the thermal imaging devices, all destroyed in an instant when the entity made itself known. My hands tremble as they grip this phone, recording what might be my final testimony. The temperature keeps dropping, and the smell of cigar smoke grows stronger with each passing minute. Through the window, the beam of light sweeps across Lake Michigan, but something is wrong with its rhythm. The light moves too slowly, as if being turned by hand, just like it was in 1895. The entity is watching me write this. It stands in the corner, wearing the same lighthouse keeper uniform it died in over a century ago. But this is not just another ghost story. This is a warning about Sul Chuai Point Lighthouse, about the doors we should never open, and the questions we should never ask. The keeper wants its story told, and it has chosen me to tell it. The true story of Sul Chuai Point Lighthouse begins with blood. The native people who first lived on these shores called this place Sul Chuai, the only choice, because it offered the only safe harbor for miles along the treacherous Michigan coast. But safety came with a price. The lighthouse was built on sacred ground, erected where ancient tribal elders once performed their rituals. The first keeper, Joseph Willie Townsend, arrived in 1895, unaware of the dark energy that permeated the land. The historical records paint Townsend as a dedicated keeper, a man who never missed a night of duty in 15 years of service. But the records neglect to mention the changes in his behavior during those final years. The increasing isolation, the obsessive log entries, the strange symbols carved into the tower walls that still remain hidden beneath layers of paint. Local fishermen began avoiding the lighthouse, speaking in whispers about lights moving in the tower when Townsend was known to be elsewhere. His family reported hearing him having conversations with unseen entities in the dead of night. When Townsend died in 1910, his body was found at the top of the tower, clutching his logbook, a look of absolute terror frozen on his face. But death did not end his watch. The new keepers reported strange occurrences, doors locking themselves, equipment moving on its own, and most disturbing of all, the sound of someone climbing the tower steps every night at midnight. My investigation of Sul Chuai Point Lighthouse should have been routine. The Historical Society had granted me unprecedented access, 3 nights alone in the lighthouse to document the reported paranormal activity. The first signs of trouble appeared before sunset. The equipment set up perfectly, but every battery arrived completely drained despite being fully charged at the hotel. The backup batteries failed too, along with the generator. As darkness fell, only my phone retained power. The old lighthouse keeper museum looked different in the dark. The preserved artifacts seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy. The most unsettling piece was the chair, a simple wooden rocking chair that belonged to Keeper Townsend. Throughout the first night, it kept rocking on its own, but the motion was wrong. It moved as if someone was violently rocking in it, but the movements were jerky, unnatural, like watching a film played backward. Around midnight, the first major event occurred. The temperature throughout the lighthouse dropped to near freezing, despite the warm summer night outside. The logbook, sealed in a glass case, suddenly flew across the room and landed open at my feet. The entry displayed was dated the day of Townsend's death, but the handwriting was fresh, wet ink still glistening on the page. The words made my blood run cold. "They are coming up the tower. God help me." The second night brought manifestations beyond anything documented in paranormal history. The entire lighthouse transformed around me. The modern renovations peeled away like old wallpaper, revealing the lighthouse as it existed in 1910. The electric lights exploded in showers of sparks, replaced by the warm glow of oil lamps that had not burned in over a century. The air grew thick with the smell of cigar smoke and sea salt. Phantom sounds filled the structure, the creak of old wood, the clink of brass equipment, the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks. But most terrifying was the laughter. It started as a low chuckle, echoing from the top of the tower, then grew into a chorus of voices, all laughing with increasing madness. The shadows began moving independently of any light source, crawling across the walls like living things. They gathered in corners, forming shapes that hurt the eyes to look at. Through the windows, I could see impossible things, ghost ships moving across the lake, their phantom crews frozen in moments of terror as their vessels crashed against rocks that no longer existed. The entity of Keeper Townsend appeared at the height of this chaos, but it was not alone. Other figures moved through the walls, native elders, lighthouse workers, drowned sailors, all drawn to this nexus of supernatural energy. They formed a procession up the tower steps, each one turning to stare at me as they passed. Time lost all meaning during the third night. The boundary between past and present dissolved completely. The entity of Keeper Townsend revealed the truth about Sul Choi Point Lighthouse. It was never meant to be just a beacon for ships. The native elders had built their sacred site here to contain something far older than human civilization, something that slumbered in the depths beneath the lighthouse. The light that sweeps across Lake Michigan serves a darker purpose than warning ships. It maintains an ancient barrier, holding back forces that would drive humans mad if they could see them. Townsend learned this truth too late. His dedication to keeping the light burning night after night was not born of duty, but of desperate necessity. The logbook contains the real story, written in a code that took me hours to decipher. The symbols carved into the tower walls are not decorative. They are wards of protection, crafted by the tribal elders and maintained by each keeper in turn. The entity showed me visions of what lurks beyond the light's reach, things that defy description, that should not exist in our reality. The other spirits that haunt the lighthouse are not trapped here. They stand guard alongside Townsend, maintaining an eternal vigil against forces they cannot defeat, only contain. The sun rises over Lake Michigan, but the horrors witnessed in Sul Choi Point Lighthouse cannot be banished by daylight. The truth weighs heavily. This place stands as a barrier between our world and something unimaginable. Every night, Keeper Townsend continues his rounds, not because of dedication to his former duty, but because he understands the consequences of failure. The Historical Society will never display my full report. The photos and videos have been secured in a vault, deemed too dangerous for public viewing. The lighthouse remains open for tours, but no one stays after dark anymore. The entity of Townsend remains vigilant, his spirit joined by others who learned the truth and chose to stay. They gather each night in the tower, maintaining their eternal watch. The native elders were right. This place truly was the only choice for a lighthouse, but not to guide ships to safety. The light must remain burning, the barrier must hold, and the truth must stay hidden. But sometimes, on dark nights when the waves crash against the rocks and the beacon sweeps across the lake, visitors report seeing multiple figures in the tower. They stand together, guardians against an ancient darkness, keeping their eternal vigil over Sul Choi Point. The laughter still echoes on stormy nights, and the logbook continues to receive new entries in Townsend's hand. Some lighthouses guide ships to safety. This one protects us from what lies beyond the light. The blood-curdling scream that echoed through Gibraltar Point Lighthouse that night still haunts my dreams. I was just another urban explorer with a camera and too much curiosity, but what I captured in that lighthouse changed my life forever. My name is Mason, and I'm about to share footage that I've kept hidden for 3 years. Why now? Because the nightmares won't stop, and maybe sharing this story will finally set me free. The locals warned me about the lighthouse, about the murdered keeper whose spirit still roams its spiral staircase. I laughed it off back then. Now, I wake up every night at 4 a.m., my body drenched in cold sweat, remembering the horrors I witnessed in that cursed tower on Toronto Island. I'm not here to convince you to believe in ghosts. I'm here to warn you about what happens when you mock the dead. The evidence is all here, in my shaking hands, in my trembling voice, and in the footage that nearly cost me my sanity. Before I show you what I recorded that night, I need you to understand how it all began, and why the Gibraltar Point Lighthouse holds a darkness that goes beyond any ghost story you've ever heard. The story of John Paul Rattlemuller isn't just a tale told around campfires. It's a dark stain on Toronto's history that nobody wants to acknowledge. I spent weeks researching before my visit, digging through dusty archives and interviewing elderly locals who spoke about the lighthouse in whispers. In 1815, Rattlemuller was more than just a lighthouse keeper. He was a German immigrant who served as a butler to the Duke of Wellington before coming to Canada. According to the newspapers I found, on a bitter January night, 2 soldiers visited him, hoping to buy his homemade beer. What happened next was pieced together from bloodstains and broken furniture. They say Rattlemuller was beaten to death, his body dismembered and buried in pieces around the lighthouse grounds. The soldiers were never convicted, and Rattlemuller's complete remains were never found. Only his boots, filled with severed feet, washed up on the shore months later. But here's what the history books don't tell you. Every lighthouse keeper since then has reported strange occurrences. Tools disappearing, lights turning on by themselves, and the sound of heavy boots climbing the stairs at night. I discovered logs from the 1900s where keepers documented unexplained phenomena, windows that would shatter without cause, and the constant feeling of being watched. I arrived at the lighthouse just as the sun was setting, my camera equipment weighing heavy on my shoulders. The structure loomed above me, its white paint peeling like dead skin from its weathered walls. The winter wind howled through cracks in the ancient windows, creating a sound that seemed almost like words. I set up my first camera in the keeper's quarters, another at the base of the spiral staircase, and kept one handy for mobile shooting. Everything was normal at first, just the creaks and groans you'd expect from a 200-year-old building. But as darkness fell, the temperature dropped drastically. My breath came out in thick clouds, and the batteries in my equipment began draining at an impossible rate. I changed them 3 times in the first hour. Then the whispers started. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but they became clearer, fragments of German phrases I couldn't understand. My cameras picked up strange orbs of light moving up and down the staircase. The air became thick with the smell of stale beer and copper, like old blood. I tried to maintain my composure, telling myself there were logical explanations. But deep down, I knew I had stepped into something beyond logical explanation. The lighthouse was aware of my presence, and whatever dwelled within its walls was stirring. It happened at exactly 3:33 a.m. I was reviewing footage on my laptop when all 3 cameras simultaneously lost power. The temperature plummeted so low that ice crystals began forming on the windows. That's when I heard it. Heavy boots on the spiral staircase, slowly ascending, step by step. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in complete darkness. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the sound of something heavy being dragged behind them. I fumbled with my phone's light, and what I saw made my blood freeze. A dark figure stood at the top of the stairs, wearing the uniform of a 19th century lighthouse keeper. But where its head should have been, there was only a dark void. In its hand, it clutched an old lantern that emitted a sickly green light. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure raised its free hand, pointing directly at me, and in that moment, every window in the lighthouse shattered simultaneously. The sound of German screaming filled the air, and my camera, which had been dead, suddenly turned on by itself, recording everything. The entity moved towards me with impossible speed, and I felt an icy grip around my throat. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was a voice whispering in my ear, You shouldn't have come here." When I woke up, I was lying at the base of the lighthouse, my equipment scattered around me. The sun was rising, and everything seemed normal, except for the deep bruises on my neck in the shape of fingerprints. My cameras were working again, and what they captured makes my heart stop every time I watch it. The footage shows everything: the temperature drops, registered by my equipment, the mysterious orbs of light, the figure on the stairs. But it's the audio that truly terrifies me. When enhanced, you can clearly hear German phrases being spoken, phrases that, when translated, tell the true story of Radlmüller's murder. He wasn't just killed for his beer. He was silenced because he knew dark secrets about prominent Toronto families. The EVP recordings picked up his last moments, his pleas for mercy, and the sound of his killers laughing as they ended his life. The most chilling piece of evidence? A photograph taken by my main camera at exactly 3:33 a.m., showing a man in 19th century clothing standing next to me while I was unconscious. His face is clearly visible, matching the only known portrait of John Paul Radlmüller. But in the photo, his neck bears the same bruises that appeared on mine. 3 years have passed since that night, but the Gibraltar Point Lighthouse hasn't finished with me. Every electronic device in my home malfunctions at 3:33 a.m. My security cameras capture unexplained figures walking through walls. German whispers echo through my apartment when I'm alone. But the most terrifying development happened last week. While reviewing the footage for this video, I noticed something I'd missed before. In every frame where the lighthouse is visible, there's a face in one of the windows, not Radlmüller's but someone else's. Someone who looks exactly like me, wearing the same clothes I'm wearing right now, staring directly into the camera with dead eyes. The implications of this discovery keep me awake at night. Did something follow me home from the lighthouse? Or did a part of me never leave that cursed tower? I'm sharing this story now because I need to know if anyone else has seen what I've seen. The lighthouse still stands on Toronto Island. Its light still shines every night. And somewhere within its walls, John Paul Radlmüller still waits for visitors. But ask yourself this: if you go there, will you be documenting the haunting or becoming part of it? The choice is yours. Just remember, some stories don't end when the video does. Sometimes, they follow you home. The melody that calls from these waters isn't meant for human ears. 3 weeks ago, I took over as the lighthouse keeper at Point Haven, and now I understand why no one ever stays. It started on my 4th night. I was doing my usual rounds, checking the lamp's rotation, when I heard it. A single, crystal-clear note floating up from the churning waves below. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks. But wind doesn't hum in perfect pitch. Wind doesn't make you feel like your soul is being pulled from your body. I rushed to the window, peering into the darkness below. The moon was full that night, casting a silver path across the water. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw something move beneath the surface. Something massive. Something that shouldn't be there. I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion, the isolation playing with my mind. But then I found the logbook, hidden behind a loose brick in the basement. The pages were water-stained, the handwriting frantic. The singing, the previous keeper wrote. It knows my name now. That entry was dated exactly 1 year ago. The keeper disappeared 3 days later. I should have left right then. Should have packed my bags and never looked back. But something kept me here. The same force that draws me to the window each night, that makes me lean out just a little further each time. I'm writing this now because I need someone to know what's happening here. Need someone to understand why we keep disappearing. The singing is getting louder now, clearer. And God help me, it's starting to make sense. The logbook became my obsession. Each night after securing the lamp, I'd pore over its pages until my eyes burned. Every keeper before me had heard it, the song that comes from somewhere beneath the waves. Some lasted weeks, others only days. Their entries started rational enough, documenting times and weather conditions, but they all changed. The handwriting would grow erratic, the words desperate. It shows me things when I sleep, one wrote. Cities beneath the waves, towers of black coral where something ancient dreams. I recognized my own descent in their words. The song was changing me too. I caught myself standing at the railing of the observation deck for hours, staring into the depths below. Time seemed to slip away during these episodes. I'd come to my senses with my clothes soaked in sea spray. No memory of how long I'd been there. But worse than the blackouts were the dreams. In them, I walked through underwater gardens of pale, luminous flowers that pulsed with their own light. Ghostly shapes danced at the edge of my vision, always just out of sight. And there was something waiting for me, something that spoke in harmonies that made my bones vibrate. I started keeping my own record, trying to maintain some grip on reality. The song was different for each keeper, I realized. Some heard violin strings, others described it as ethereal humming. For me, it was a woman's voice, though calling it that feels wrong somehow. It was too perfect, too precise, like mathematics given sound, and it was getting closer. Each night, it seemed to rise just a little higher up the lighthouse walls. Yesterday, I finally found what I was looking for in the town records. Point Haven Lighthouse wasn't the first to stand on these rocks. There was another, built in 1823, but it lasted less than a year. The official record claims it was destroyed by a storm, but I found a different story in the newspapers of the time. Every member of the lighthouse crew vanished on the same night. The only clue was a message carved into the walls. She sings for her dead. I kept digging, and the pattern emerged. Every 20 years, like clockwork, keepers would start disappearing. The authorities blamed storms, accidents, or madness brought on by isolation. But they all vanished the same way, drawn to the water by that haunting melody. The locals have their own stories, passed down in whispers. They say that centuries ago, a ship carrying prisoners to the New World sank here. Among them was a woman accused of witchcraft, who swore as she drowned that she would pull down any light that dared to guide ships away from her grave. But I don't believe in ghost stories anymore. What I've seen in those waters is something older than human vengeance, something that was here long before us and will remain long after we're gone. The song isn't calling me to death, it's calling me home. That's what the other keepers realized too in their final days. We're not meant to keep ships away from these rocks. We're meant to guide souls to her. The power went out tonight. I was halfway up the stairs to check the lamp when darkness swallowed everything. My flashlight beam seemed to die inches from my face, absorbed by the unnatural black. And in that darkness, I finally saw them. They lined the spiral staircase, translucent figures with eyes like pale moons, their bodies rippling like seaweed in a current. The previous keepers, standing silent watch. I should have been terrified, but the song was in my blood now, making everything seem right, natural. They parted as I walked through them, their cold essence passing through me like waves. Each contact shared a fragment of memory, their last moments, their final understanding. I saw through their eyes as they walked into the sea, felt their joy as the waters closed over their heads. They weren't victims, they were initiates. At the top of the lighthouse, the lamp was still dark, but something else was illuminating the night. Pillars of light rose from the ocean floor, pulsing in rhythm with the song. They revealed what I had glimpsed only in fragments before, a vast underwater city of impossible architecture, its spires reaching up through the depths like grasping fingers. Schools of strange, glowing creatures swam through its streets, casting shifting shadows on ancient walls covered in writings that hurt my eyes to look at. This was what the song had been showing me all along. Not an ending, but a beginning. The logbook sits before me now, open to a blank page. My hands shake as I write what I know will be my final entry. The song has reached its crescendo, and I finally understand its words. They speak of a world beneath, of knowledge and secrets that mankind was never meant to know. The keepers who came before me weren't taken, they were chosen. Each of us was called here for a reason, our souls already attuned to that otherworldly frequency. We're not meant to be guardians of the light. We're meant to be guardians of something far older, far deeper. The city I saw isn't just beneath the waves, it's beneath reality itself, in a place where the boundaries between dimensions have worn thin. The beings who dwell there have been watching us, studying us, selecting those who could serve as their intermediaries. The lighthouse is not just a beacon for ships, it's a doorway, and we are its gatekeepers. I know now why I was drawn here. why I couldn't leave even when I discovered the truth. The song isn't calling me to death, it's calling me to transformation. Outside my window, the water is beginning to glow with that same unearthly light. The air is thick with salt and something else, something ancient and powerful. The choice lies before me now: remain here, bound by the limitations of my human existence, or step through that doorway into something greater than I could ever imagine. The sun will rise soon, but I won't be here to see it. The song has reached its final note, a sound so beautiful it brings tears to my eyes. The water below has turned to liquid light, rippling with colors that have no names in any human language. My predecessor stands beside me now, more real than the ghost I first saw. Her smile is radiant, her body transformed by the power that claimed her. "It's time," she whispers, her voice harmonizing with the song that fills every atom of my being. The other keepers have gathered too, forming a bridge of light that stretches from the lighthouse into the depths below. Through their translucent forms, I can see the city clearer than ever, a metropolis of dreams and nightmares, where the laws of physics are mere suggestions. This will be my last human act, recording this warning, or perhaps this invitation, for whoever finds this logbook. If you hear the song, don't fight it, don't run. You're not losing your mind, you're being given the key to a door you never knew existed. The light in the lighthouse will go dark tonight, but a new light is waiting below. I take my place among the others now, my body already beginning to change. The water calls, and I answer. We all do, in the end. After all, how can you fear drowning when you've finally learned how to breathe?